very warm welcome to all our viewers and welcome to a new edition of Africa Today, our show that brings you all the latest news and events happening in the African continent. My name is Angie Mayer and I'll be joining you for today's edition. As usual, we begin straight away with a look at some of the news making the headlines, and we go to the African Development Bank, which is to give $271 million in loans to Egypt. A session of the People's Assembly approved the loan where participants said Egypt is one of the countries that has been most affected by the global food security crisis and, of course, is striving to achieve food self-sufficiency. We have more details in this report.
Minister of Foreign Affairs Sameh Shoukry has confirmed that Egypt is ready to host a global center for the supply and storage of grain in cooperation with the international community in a way that helps face the ongoing food crisis worldwide. The top Egyptian diplomat stressed the necessity of adopting a comprehensive approach to deal with the global challenges and reach effective and joint solutions. He highlighted in this regard the challenges facing the countries of the global south as a result of the global crises, including coronavirus supply chain crises, food security and climate change. Shoukry also stressed that access to energy and energy transformation for all countries cannot be achieved unless sufficient funding is secured and technology is transferred to developing countries. The FM called for the G20 to provide the necessary momentum to reformulate the international economic system, especially the African one, so that it responds effectively and in a timely manner to the challenges facing the countries of the global south. He stressed Egypt's commitment to constructive engagement in the discussions and initiatives that will be put forward within the framework of the G20 in order to reach consensus on the ongoing complex challenges. These files include enhancing global food security and supporting international financing institutions to better face successive crises.
And in a session at the People's Assembly which approved the loan, where the participants said that Egypt has been granted $271 million in loans by the African Development Bank. We now bring you more details in this report.
Cairo is to receive $271 million in loans from the African Development Bank. At the House of Representatives, a plenary session approved the Agriculture and Irrigation Committee's report. It issued Resolution 613 of 2022 on a loan agreement at $271. The loan is to support the food security and economic resilience in Egypt. The committee said Egypt's food security has faced successive crises, starting with the coronavirus pandemic, which led to the disruption of supply chains, and ending with the Russian-Ukrainian war and the economic crisis that followed. It said Egypt is one of the countries most affected by the crisis, which prompted cooperation with international partners to reduce the negative impact of global crises and strive towards achieving self-sufficiency and food security. It said the agreement aims to achieve food security and enhance the ability of the Egyptian agricultural sector to face successive crises worldwide. It also said the agreement helps with facing development obstacles resulting from global crises and will be used to stimulate the private sector. According to the committee, the idea of soft borrowing for the sake of development and food security support is undisputed because the return on borrowing in these cases is of great benefit and does not represent a burden on the citizens, as they said. The agricultural sector is now considered one of the most important successful production sectors that need to be expanded. The statement is repeated by officials. They say this is not only due to the success of agricultural investments, but also because it is responsible for achieving food security, which is the current biggest goal challenge.
We're now delighted to be joined over the telephone by our guest for this afternoon, Dr. Ahmed El-Lisidi, Professor of International Economics. Dr. Ahmed, a very good afternoon to you, sir.
Good morning to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much for joining us. Doctor, let me start by asking you, how do you see the timing of the loan by the African Development Bank, which is to grant $271 million in loans to Egypt?
I think the timing comes in the right particular moment. Clearly, the world context is going through a very, very tough time. And one of the key issues that Egypt found itself with in the middle of is the war between Ukraine and Russia.
Yes.
Unfortunately, that to combine the two countries export to Egypt almost about 50% more or less of its consumption of agriculture products, specifically wheat and animal feed. And of course, being in such a long-term war, the two countries, both of them are facing trouble. And as a result of that, Egypt is going through a very, very tough time.
Yes.
When the basic product costs prices for the layman and the normal people is going through the roof. So it is definitely the right time to support Egypt with such a loan.
Yes. Let's talk a bit, Dr. Ahmed, about some of the measures that you think are needed to secure, better food security, especially for African countries.
Well, again, Egypt is not an exception in the continent. I mean, so many different countries in Africa are facing major issues nowadays, specifically as a result of this war again, and as a result of the global inflation. And in Africa, we have about 40, 45 countries almost, and most of them, or the majority of these populations, are living below poverty line. And obviously, the inflation, when you're already, the hyperinflation that we're all going through, when you're already below the poverty line, becomes a totally a major threat, even for the continuity of life in many of these countries. We've seen Egypt going through major problems. We see also Tunisia having major issues. And the sub-Saharan Africa, almost with no exception, most of the countries are going through major issues. So, obviously, Africa is the continent with the largest number of challenges when it comes to food security, and we are paying again a price for a war that we are not part of. So these are very tough times, and all sorts of support are needed at these tough times. And I think what's going on now is the best confirmation for the strategy of the President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, is that Egypt needs to be independent in the way it generates its food. Even if it comes at a little bit at a higher cost. Because before President Sisi, it has always been the thinking, okay, why would you engage into the process of agriculture and cultivating wheat, especially if we can import it so much cheaper from overseas. And today, we're seeing that sometimes there are crises that happen. You have nothing to do with them. We have very good relationship with both countries, but unfortunately, because of their situation, we found ourselves in the middle of a very serious crisis. Had we had the strategic thinking that the current administration have, we probably would have been much better off today. Egypt, and again, for no good reason, we are the larger importer in the world of wheat. And it's not like we're short of lands or solutions. The solutions are there. Yeah, maybe they might not be cheaper than the wheat that we can import from
But at least
Russia.
it will be self-sufficient. Yes.
Yeah.
Dr. Ahmed, this leads me to my next question. What do you see can be done in order to promote agricultural investments in Egypt? And we've already seen lots of steps being taken by the Egyptian government to secure enough wheat to assist farmers in planting wheat, giving them higher prices, as well as store wheat in the new silos all around the country. What needs to be done to further improve agricultural investments in Egypt?
Well, we have two dimensions to go through. What we call the vertical dimension, which means that the current surfaces that we already are cultivating produces more, and that has to do with a lot with the technology, with the cycle of irrigation and what have you. And the horizontal expansion, which has to do with simply reclaiming more land. And when we say reclaiming more land for a population of 104 million people. We're talking about major mega projects. And I think President Sisi has started with the revitalizing the huge project in Toshka, which was a very good step. And now we see the value of having such a project. And there is the other new project, which is going to be a mega one, which is the project of the new Delta. So we need such mega projects and really towards a very clear objective that we have to be self-sufficient in producing our food. It's as simple as that. We cannot depend on others, especially for strategic necessity. If we're talking about
Staples,
blueberries or golden kiwis or something like that, okay, these we can import. But for the basic necessities, for the wheat, for the animal feed, we've seen the crisis where the poultry industry has been through recently. We need to the fertilizers as well, the oils, the cooking oils, and the sunflower, and the corn. These are strategic crops that we have no choice but to be self-independent. This is a matter of national security. This is a matter of safety for the country. Again, if we're talking about a minor indulgent sort of products or agriculture products, we can import them. But we have to be locally self-sufficient to stand on our own feet and be able to feed our people. And I think that's the very successful strategy that the current administration is adopting.
Absolutely. Right. Now, Doctor, let me ask you another important issue related to food security. What measures do you see are needed to secure food security, not just in Egypt, but the African continent as a whole? How can they collaborate as African nations together in this regard?
The Minister of Foreign Affairs has given an extremely good speech in front of the G20 like 2 or 3 days ago. And one of the things he has mentioned is that the current economic system, globally speaking, is not really fair and it is not really working. I mean, if we take a look back at about a century, and we will find that the most wealth that has been created in the European countries actually comes from the colonization time. If we see that, I will not name the specific country in Europe, but nor in Africa, but one of the countries that is producing gold has like 1/100 of the gold stock of one European country that was colonizing it for tens of years. So if you compare the wealth, what is the source of the current wealth that the Western world is enjoying? It's coming actually from Africa. And at the same time, the Western world is literally submerging or almost drowning the African continent into debt. That formula has to be changed. It cannot go on like this, because otherwise these countries will never be able to pull themselves out of this huge debt crisis that they are in, and they will never achieve development. And as we see with the problem of migration or the illegal migration into Europe, again, we're all living on one of planets. I mean, we've seen this in COVID, we've seen this in the global warming. I mean, the political boundaries and borders will never prevent, diseases, will never present what's happening in the weather. I mean, we have to start to think humanity and a bit of fairness. I think the approach itself has to be different. Somebody needs to be bold and take a new step, a new strategy towards the African countries. Otherwise, we're all going to end up suffering.
Indeed. And, in light of the current global situation, do you see, what measures do you see African countries should take in order to, learn from their mistakes and learn their lesson with regards to achieving food security and self-sufficiency in their countries?
Well, of course, there is a lot of things that many countries need to take. I mean, to start with, there's a lot of corruption in many countries. There is a lot of fighting for power that we see almost consistently and continuously. There is a lack of education, which opens the door for Islamic terrorism, and all of that needs to be managed and put under control, because, you know, if countries in Sub-Sahara are all over, are busy with political and military coups every second day, they will never have time to focus on development. Corruption will also consume a lot of the resources available for these countries. So these are the focus that needs to be kept in: health, care, education, and controlling the corruption.
Absolutely right. So I'm afraid that's all the time we have for this segment. I'd like to thank you very, very much, Dr. Ahmed Elisi, Professor of International Economics. Thank you very much, sir, for your time and your insight, and for joining us on today's edition of Africa Today. And to continue with more news from the African continent, electricity crisis in South Africa has forced President Cyril Ramaphosa to cancel his participation in the World Economic Forum meeting in Davos, Switzerland. We have the details.
South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has cancelled his trip to the World Economic Forum in Davos in order to deal with his country's worsening power blackouts. Ramaphosa's office made the announcement. He had been scheduled to lead a delegation from South Africa to the Swiss resort town to promote the country as an investment destination. But public outrage over the electricity crisis has forced him to hold urgent meetings at home. The state-owned power utility Eskom is currently implementing a high level of power blackouts, with households and businesses going without electricity for up to 10 hours daily until further notice. Compulsory maintenance, the breakdown of generating units at its aging power stations, and years of corruption have been blamed for Eskom's failure to meet electricity demand. Ramaphosa is to meet with leaders of opposition parties, the National Energy Crisis Committee, and the Eskom board. South Africa is looking to add additional electricity capacity through emergency procurement of renewable energy sources like wind and solar, but that is unlikely to happen in the short term.
Finally, we move to Somalia, where the country said it had taken control of a key port from Al-Shabaab terrorists jointly with militias and regional forces. The government-allied clan have forced militias and terrorists from swaths of territory in central Somalia since launching a major offensive last August. We have the details.
Somalia's government-led forces have captured an Al-Shabaab stronghold on the ocean coast. The statement was made by the defense minister on Monday. The push is one of the most significant victories since launching an offensive against the group last year. The forces took the port town of Haradheri as well as the nearby town of Galsad in central Somalia's Galmudug region. Haradheri was a major base for pirates hijacking merchant ships until 2011. It was later taken over by Al-Shabaab, which first rose up against the government in 2007 before pledging its allegiance to Al-Qaeda. Also on Monday, government forces acting jointly with militias and regional forces from Galmudug and forces from the neighboring region of Puntland captured Eldhiri, another town in Galmudug. The long-running insurgency by Al-Shabaab has contributed to an acute food crisis in Somalia. More than 200,000 Somalis are suffering catastrophic food shortages and many are dying of hunger, with that number set to rise to over 700,000 next year. The government and allied clan militias have forced the militants from swathes of territory in central Somalia since launching a major offensive last August.
With this final news item, we wrap up today's edition of Africa Today. We do hope you have enjoyed it. Do join us again tomorrow just after 2 p.m. for a new episode with a new crew. Till then, you are in the company of myself, Angie Meher. Thank you for watching.